Yeah, so I'll give a countdown of 3. Right? 3, 2, 1. Greetings everyone, this is Shreya Ghosh, hailing from Bengal and currently pursuing my bachelor's from Lady Shri Ram College for Women, and I am here today to present on the topic the veil of democracy. Jean-Jacques Rousseau once rightly remarked, in the true sense of the term, democracy never existed and will never exist. Rewind. Page 181 of my civics textbook clearly elucidated India as a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. Fast forward. 6 years down the line, I stand here today as a second-year student at the brink of an age where power and propaganda have blurred the very equilibrium of my understanding, where censorship and sedition have mingled labyrinths, where dissent and discord have completely distorted my reality, and in a scenario where the principle of majority in parliament versus majoritarianism in parliament have left me perplexed in this dichotomy. The very dichotomy of this very wheel of democracy, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people like us. Right? So how do we go about synthesizing this very wheel? This familiar silence, this known rhetoric, this accepted inevitability. History has remained testament to this phenomena, to this very phenomena of imposing a very utopian ideal on a completely distorted reality. Be it China's brutal suppression and cultural effacement of the minority Uyghur community, or the banning of Taslima Nasreen by Bangladesh, or the absolute dearth of deliberative democracy in India. It makes me think that the hyper-westernized modern notions and democracies have been fundamentally torn, both politically and ideologically, between its obligation to keep up this wheel of democracy on one hand and destroying its very fundamentals on the other. To elucidate my stance, I would take up the case of India and what we have been going through in the recent years, right? So in India, which has been downgraded from a democracy to an electoral autocracy by independent Swedish institute, a scenario where the largest democracy in the world stands languishing at the 142nd rank in the World Freedom Press Index among 180 nations and is rated as one of the most dangerous countries of journalists in the world. A country where jingoistic nationalism, religious fanaticism and majoritarianism have created a situation where the principles of liberty, of freedom and expression is considerably succumbed to the state under the garb of stability. This sounds all too theoretical, right? So let me break this down as to what we have been living through. Hatred won, artist lost. These were the words of renowned comedian Munawar Farooqi when he was slapped UAPA charges and 12 of his shows were cancelled for allegedly hurting Hindu sentiment based on the art that he hadn't even created. So let me use the democratic power of questioning, at least in this very auditorium, to raise more questions than answers. Why is it a democracy when a journalist like Siddiq Kapil is charged with sedition and incitement to violence and religious outrage when he shows the grit and commitment to his profession to go and cover the sensitive rape case at Hathras of a Dalit girl? Which mask of democracy do we actually flaunt when religious practices like hijab are debated, discussed and essentialized in educational institutions which ought to have been the nerve centers of westernization and liberal thinking? What we see today is a government whereby through its top-down centralized bureaucracy, it is actually number one, muting the voices of subaltern, number two, it is staking the very principles of participatory politics, and number three, it is absolutely failing in ameliorating the interests of the stakeholders in the very dialectics of decision making. How is this manifested? We have been living through it in the recent years of the pandemic, right? We have been seeing the contracted debates in parliament, the reduced amount of question hour, the evasion of scrutiny by the opposition, and so on and so forth. Moving on from here, we need to understand that cocooning this very wheel of democracy from our comforted homes, it's absolutely like a wet matchstick, defeating the very purpose of ignition. So the very basis of equality that democracy espouses is actually called to question when we begin to examine as how the mainland forgetful India has been treating its margins and peripheries. Where was democracy when Iram Sharmila of Manipur actually lay deprived of food and water and the very means to live a dignified life while protesting against this very liberal democratic state for the draconian for repealing the draconian law of Armed Forces Special Powers Act? It's no longer a situation of very hyperbolic, phrases and fancy words. It's a situation that you and I and common people around us have been living through day in and day out. We have seen it in the brutal repression of the Shaheen Bagh protest and in the in the detention of activists like Safura Sagar and Umar Khalid. We've seen it in the 378-day-long farmer struggle who have been crying for their very means of livelihood in the blistering heat and teething cold against a dictatorial government. We have been seeing it in the numerous people arrested under preventive detention, in the strikes and condonements in the Kashmir Valley in the past 2 years post the revocation of Article 370. Had it been a democracy, the government wouldn't have been concerned more with love jihad at a time when heaths and households had been ravaged by the pandemic. Had it been a democracy, the voices of Dalits and subaltern wouldn't have been meshed and crumpled and pushed to the peripheries like this. Had it been a democracy, people like you and me and intellectuals and writers and poets and painters of our age would have a greater flow over their instruments of expression than they have today. Being a movie buff, I would just like to conclude with a slight adaptation of a dialogue of the much contested film Kashmir Files. It says, in politics, one doesn't need to give a solution, but just a mere hope for it. Manifesting this in today's context, it makes me feel that was true democracy ever a tangible ideal to be perceived, or this illusion ever evasive? Just like this hope, and which exists within the wheel that it puts up. With that, very, very proud to propose. Thank you.
So much, Shreya. Next upon we have Nidhi Rawat from Symbiosis Pune. Nidhi Rawat from Symbiosis Pune, give her a huge round of applause.